refuge? Refuge?
Yeah, hang on. Okay. So before we say the prayers, just remember what we're saying. Try and make sure we put into our hearts the meaning of the words. We're going to sing a prayer that the first part of which expresses our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, and that's important. And then the second part is expressing this amazing altruistic reason or motivation or goal for our being here together, listening to Buddha's teachings, this bodhicitta, this outrageous state of mind that wants only to help others and never stopping working on ourselves to become a Buddha, because then we'll be fully qualified to help others. That's our long-term perspective, expressing these thoughts. And then making an offering of all the contents of the universe to the Buddha, as if he were here himself, giving us the teaching, as a request for the teaching. Okay.
Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema, por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema, por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Voy por refugio hasta alcanzar la iluminación, al Buda, al Dharma y a la Asamblea Suprema, por los méritos que acumule practicando la generosidad y demás perfecciones, que pueda obtener el estado de Buda para beneficiar a todos los seres. Esta tierra ungida con perfume y regada de flores, con el monte Meru, los 4 continentes, el sol y la luna, vista como una tierra pura de Budas, yo te ofrezco, que todos los seres puedan gozar de una tierra así. Oh sagrado y venerable Lama, desde las nubes de compasión que se forman en los cielos de tu sabiduría dharmakāyika, por favor derrama una lluvia de Dharma vasto y profundo, de acuerdo precisamente con las necesidades de los que serán adiestrados. Idam Guru Rana Mandala Kaniryatayami.
So, like we were talking yesterday, is that not too loud? No? It's okay? So, we were talking yesterday, this more advanced way of understanding attachment, which is actually taught in the Bodhisattva part of the path. But it's so hard to see, because it's so instinctive within us. This one especially of attachment to what other people think of us, how it completely runs our lives, informs our choices. And especially in that part of the path where it's in the, actually I think it's in the context, isn't it, of that approach to achieving bodhicitta called lojong, mind, where this amazing, or exchanging self for others, in which we learn about all the business of transforming problems into happiness. But as Pabonka Rinpoche says in the Lam Rim, to do this level of practice, we need to be suitable vessels. Which means we need to have practiced the earlier stages. And that's why it's so important when we hear the teachings that just like if you're learning anything, if you were studying music, the moment you heard a piece of music, you would know exactly what level it is. Mathematics, anything we learn, we know what level it is, and we know what our level is in relation to it. We don't tend to think of spiritual teachings like that, but this is exactly the point here, and it's unbelievably important. The fact is, in one day, because we're applying all the different tools from the different stages of practice, but we need to know what we're doing, not just giving it all equal status as Buddha's teachings. There's there are many levels of it. So every time you control your speech and don't say those bad words, you're practicing junior school. It's the very first level of practice, the lowest scope of the Lamrim. Or as Lama Zopa calls it, the practice of the being of lowest capability. I prefer to call it junior school. It works immediately for our mind. We get that one. Not this medieval phrase, it's hard to understand. Then every time you can look at your mind and you check up the anger, the hurt, the jealousy, you notice what it is, and you calm it down, you argue with it, you be your own therapist. As Lama Yeshe says, you're practicing the middle scope. That's middle scope teachings, high school. Every time you're generous to another sentient being, that's university. That's the Mahayana part of the path to enlightenment. So we need to know this, though. We need to know where all the teachings fit, because certainly this whole level the eight worldly dharmas is taught in is the most advanced level of the teachings, the most dramatic level, the most radical way of working on the mind. And we will no way in the world see these levels of attachment, which are so instinctive, which at the moment completely are the basis of our ordinary samsaric life, until we know the grosser level of attachment, which is right at the beginning stages of the path. And therefore also until we really understand the way karma works, until even you could say that we have some understanding of emptiness, how things appear to us in a certain way. Having awareness of all this from studying and practicing the earlier stages of path, this informs our ability to really give up the eight worldly dharmas, as the lamas call it. Otherwise, too difficult, And certainly, our ability to understand the eight worldly dharmas. So, for example, the discussion we had yesterday about the confusion between whether it's a kind action to your family, being compassionate, or whether it's your own attachment to reputation. Be able to even see the difference, we have to know Buddhist psychology, which you study in the middle scope, where you really learn to understand Buddha's model of the mind. All of this is assumed in this more advanced level of giving up the eight worldly dharmas, even understanding them. But often it's so interesting because it's in the part of the teachings that's related to love and compassion. We like the idea of love and compassion. It seems easier to us, But actually the way that they're taught in the Lamrim, they're outrageously difficult, I remember when I first heard the teachings from the lamas about bodhicitta, I thought they were crazy. I thought they were mad talking. It was like talking like you had to be a saint. And that really is a good word. We hear about saints, and we immediately put them up there and think, well, they're just born that way. They're special. And you don't go to a course to become like Saint Therese of Lisieux. There's no course out there, oh, I'd like to become like Saint Therese, please, and, suffer for God and become a nun when I'm 14. You think she's born a saint. She just is a saint. But this is exactly what the Bodhisattva path is. They're saints, We're learning to go way beyond the normal worldly understanding of what we as humans are capable of. And this is the point that's so outrageous about Buddha's teachings, his Mahayana teachings especially. So we should take them deadly seriously. They're really difficult. It seems to me that actually it's easier to deal with emptiness, with the wisdom teachings. They're kind of manageable. But the bodhicitta teachings, insane. Loving your enemies. It sounds so crazy, All those teachings are part of this. So unless we have some deep, reasonable understanding as a basis of the very first stages of teachings, which is the Buddha's teachings of karma, you learn that in junior school. The basic practice at the first level of teachings, the junior school level, the lowest scope, it's abiding by the laws of karma. And this already is difficult enough, There's not even much discussion there about the mind. That comes later in the middle scope, where we learn to deeply understand the mind and really learn to unpack and distinguish between all this big soup of emotions in our head, Like the first level of practice seems almost like doesn't even seem like spiritual practice. I think maybe I mentioned yesterday, where Buddha has his little checklist of 10 don'ts. Well, the first 7 are about the body and the speech. And basically, Buddha's telling us to behave nicely. That's all it is. Our mummy would say to us, behave nicely. We don't think that's spiritual practice. We just think that's kind of common sense, And Buddha doesn't own this. He doesn't create this up. He didn't make this up. Like I said yesterday, I think good communists would behave nicely. Good Christians, good Muslims, good materialists all agree in behaving nicely, treating other people nicely, not killing, not lying, not stealing. Well, this is Buddha's first level of practice. So why would he tell us something so simple? Well, I think we began to look at this yesterday, really getting very, very clear. And this is so important as a basis for understanding the later parts of the teachings, because they do go progressively and they get more advanced. So this is where it's really crucial to understand what, again, remind us of where Buddha's teachings come from. We know Buddha's not a creator. We think this, we know this, but we really got to look into that really clearly and look at the implications of this. Because we're so familiar with thinking of a spiritual path as a belief system. Oh, I believe in Buddha, I believe in karma, I believe in Jesus Christ. Well, it's not like that in Buddhism. The reason we say believe in something, because it's coming from a creator religion. And a creator necessarily, a superior being, God, is not to be, it would be considered extremely arrogant to go into Jesus Christ's teachings and to prove him wrong. That would be outrageous. The whole point in the Christian teachings, the Muslim teachings, is because God is above everything else. God did create the laws of morality. God created everything. Therefore, you get out of the way and let God do his job, as one of my Christian friends said, And then, of course, you have belief. This is the perfect way to be a Christian. You totally believe. It's not a question of proving it, which is the Buddhist view. So why would Buddha want us to prove the teachings? What's the difference here? Well, the difference is huge, actually. It's not a joke, but really you could say Buddha, in his approach to his views, he is exactly like a scientist. He's completely different from the usual view of what we call religion. So on the face of it, Buddhism looks like any religion. I'm a nun. We say prayers, But there's some fundamental differences. And when we're really clear about this then informs our understanding of what morality means. This is because we discussed this, I think, a bit yesterday. There's something very instinctive in us, the wrong view about understanding what morality is. So because Buddha was a regular guy, just like everybody else, like you and me, he was deluded. He was a samsaric person before he became a Buddha. And where did, therefore, all his ideas come from? I remember, it's very interesting. We all ask the same questions. I see this all over the world. I think that we all ask the same questions. But I have to say, there's one question I've only ever heard once. And it was very curious. It was from a scientist in New Zealand. And he said, who revealed the teachings to Buddha? Because that's the natural assumption about a religion, isn't it? Joseph Smith under the tree, he got the teachings that are now called Mormonism. Moses gave somebody, whoever it was, I don't know, who gave Moses? I forget. Thank you very much. All of this. You get my point. It's always revealed. This is the idea, the whole concept of a creator. It's coming from on high, that's above everybody else and is not attainable. That's the meaning. This is the kind of the way the reification process. This is the point about the creative religions. So therefore, God is to be believed. And therefore, of course, the whole idea of morality in Christianity, for example, I asked a Catholic priest friend of mine, I said, what is a sin? What defines it? And it was very clear. He said, it's going against the will of God. That's the meaning of morality in the creative religions. That's why, like we talked yesterday, that's where forgiveness comes in. God, in order to be purified of my sin, I need to ask God, who is the boss, to forgive me. This is reasonable. It fits. But this is not the view. When we do purification in Buddhism, which we'll maybe talk about, it's completely different. Buddha has got nothing to do with Buddha forgiving us. He would forgive us. He's a nice person. But it's just not the issue, It's not the discussion. It's not the point. It's completely not the point. Yeah, it's right. So Buddha then if he was a regular guy who came up with this outrageous proposition that every single mind possesses the potential to be perfect, basically. to be completely rid of all delusions and fully developed in all goodness. Like we said yesterday, the very meaning of the word, the Tibetan word, sangye, implies these two things. And this, in ordinary terms, for example, comparing with the materialist view of the mind, and let's face it, Buddha talks about the mind, he doesn't talk about a soul, but he's got a more radical view of what the mind is, that's clear. He says actually every mind necessarily has the potential to be free of all delusions, and which are the cause of suffering, and to be full of all happiness and its causes. This is his point. So if you say that to an ordinary therapist, like one of you here might be a therapist, and I'd go to you and I'd say, would you please give me methods to get rid of all ego, all jealousy, all neurosis, all fears, and have love for every sentient being? Well, you definitely will think I'm insane. There's no question. You'd think I have extreme delusions of grandeur. You give me a pill to make me quiet, Is it not? It's true. But this is exactly what Buddha's saying. And so the point is, if Buddha's saying this, we have to, this very good scientist, this question, who revealed the teachings to Buddha? Well, nobody revealed them to him. It's like coming here and being Einstein and telling you about relativity, and I'm Einstein, and you say, well, who revealed the teachings on relativity to you? Excuse me, I saw it myself. This is the point. You see it yourself, And this is the point. Buddha in that way is identical to a scientist. Buddha has come up with, from his own hard work, his own mind has observed karma. It's a natural law, like gravity. It just occurs. It's a natural law that just occurs. Nobody made it up. The mind, he says, is not physical. He didn't make that up. He says it's a truth that can be observed. It's a cognizable fact. Consciousness goes to really subtle levels. That's a cognizable fact. The mind is beginningless and endless. That's a cognizable fact. This is the point. So that's why it's sort of like intellectual laziness to say you believe in it. I have to say for myself, I consciously never use that word. So like a good scientist, what are we doing with Buddhism? Because Buddha says, remember, that he was a regular guy who became a Buddha. And what Buddhism is simply his presenting the steps that he went through for someone who wants to go through the same steps, to get to the same conclusion, to become the same thing, a Buddha. Just like if I learn music, Mr. Bach writes all the music down and shows me how I can become my Bach. I don't just believe in music. How bizarre. I internalize it and become my own musician. This is exactly the same here. So it's really quite a powerful concept. Therefore, as His Holiness continually tells us every time he gets a chance, we've got to study the teachings. Often we say, I've been hearing about Buddhism, emptiness for 20 years and I still don't understand it. Well, it's like saying you've, learned some mathematics, and I've been thinking of, I've been listening to multiplication tables for 20 years, but I just don't understand them. Well, the only reason we can deduce you don't understand them is because you haven't studied properly, because it's perfectly knowable. We've got very intelligent minds in this modern world. We're super educated. But we assume because it's spiritual that it's somehow mystical, that it's somehow difficult. We put it in the sky and we leave it there. This is intellectual laziness, Okay, we might not all end up being Geshis, studying the stuff intensively for 30 years. But what's interesting, we're all super educated. We drive cars, we use computers. We've learned a lot. We've got a lot of knowledge in our heads that we didn't have at some point. And we've learned it accurately. We've learned mathematics accurately. We've learned, if we didn't learn to drive a car accurately, we'd all be dead now. So we've able to internalize that information. So why can't we internalize the words about emptiness, about karma? They're all there in our kind Lama's books. Look at Geshe Sopa. He spent 25 years teaching the Lam to us, Now it's all nicely published in those books. So it's not a question of just listening to it and then forgetting it, which is what we do. We need to remember it. And we need to be exact and precise. This is the basis of realizations. Because what a realization is, the word they use in Buddhism, just means you experientially understand something. That's all. And we're doing that every day. When you first learned mathematics, you didn't have a clue what 1 + 1 means. But you learned it and you internalized it. And when you do that, you're doing two things. You heard the information from your teacher. You don't know it's true. You have no idea. You've never heard it before. But what does she ask you to do? She goes home And this is actually an interesting way of talking about meditation. This is a big surprise to us. You know, she goes home. She says, I want you to go home, Robina, and I want you to do the first mode of meditation and get some concentration, get some focus. Then I want you to go to the second mode of meditation, and I want you to do some analytical meditation here, and then I want you to get an insight into this and discover that 1 + 1 is 2. That's what she would have said to us, except she didn't use those words, did she? She said, go home and do your homework. Hopefully tomorrow you know what the answer is. Well, that's what the two kinds of meditation are. It's so interesting. If we look at the word meditation, the Tibetan word, gom, is the verb to familiarize. Well, to familiarize what with what? Obviously our mind. To familiarize your mind with something. Well, a simple way to say what that is, it means to learn something. You know, the teacher didn't go and say, familiarize your mind with this sums, Robina. That's two kind of fancy words. She would have said, go and learn it. That's all it means, to familiarize your mind. And all Buddhas ask you to do is do two things. This is what becoming a Buddha entails. We need to familiarize our mind with, one, that which is true. That's what wisdom means, not some holy thing in the sky. Wisdom means getting the facts straight, knowing what is true. Buddha says the first one. The second one, and they come hand in hand, is familiarizing our mind with that which is virtuous. So this is a really interesting combination. We would never think that these two belong together, but this is the point. What you're trying to do, becoming a Buddha. So what's the implication of this? That our minds at the moment are familiar with that which is not true and that which is not virtuous. And this is Buddha's point, because this is the cause of suffering. So meditation, the first kind, there's two kinds. Millions of techniques, but two kinds essentially. The first one, which is crucial, which is this technique that's in the Hinayana part of the path, in high school, in the second scope, but actually it's a Hindu teaching. It was the Hindus, as I mentioned yesterday. I remember reading His Holiness recently. It was the Hindus maybe 3,000 years ago who developed this conversation about the nature of self, which is exactly what Buddha's on it. You know, what Buddha is on about, but he diverged in his own direction, taking the argument further, you know. So this technique, this amazing psychological technique that enables us to access more subtle, more refined levels of our own mind, because this is Buddha's view about the mind. It's not the brain, and you know, and it can go way beyond this gross conceptual sensory level that we live at now, and we must, in the long term, access these more subtle levels. You know, this single-pointed concentration, or calm abiding, as it's called, which is the name of the result. Having accomplished this single-pointedness. We need in the long term to have this in order to do the second mode of meditation, which is the real work. This is where the real work happens. So the actual name for this, as we know, looking in the Lam Rim, is special insight. Well, I know the word insight in English is a really good word. I forget what it is in Spanish, but I know in different languages the word that's used is often kind of sounds very holy. But the word insight is a really good word. You know, you get it internally. You get an insight into something. It's more than mere intellectual knowledge. And that's all knowledge when it's experiential knowledge, and that's all it means. It's a really excellent word. And special insight here is referring to, of course, insight into emptiness. But the principle of this insight is into all the teachings. We have to cultivate insight into all the teachings. So the methodology in the context of these two types of meditation is very simple. It's like we've learned anything. You first have to listen to the words. You've got to listen to the theories of cooking, the theories of mathematics, the theories of the music even. You listen to the theories first, which initially is completely conceptual, and we don't know it. So then you go home and do your homework, which means you've got to have some focus. Okay, we don't have a thing called single-pointed concentration, but you know you can't internalize anything. You can't do your homework properly. You can't do your practice on the piano properly. If you can't have some focus, your mind's useless. You can't make a cake if you don't have any concentration. So you've got to have concentration, except that, of course, the technique here is much more radical concentration than we could ever imagine, but the principle is there. So you get your concentration first. The point is to then do the real work of understanding 1 + 1. So what do? You use your thoughts. What else would you use? You don't sit there going, 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 2, hoping for a vision to come, which is how we think of meditation. It's completely ridiculous. You've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama Yeshe says, So you think it through. You have to, but then in order to think something through, you've got to have the facts correct. You've got to have the right facts. This is why, but we don't get this when we come to the spiritual teachings. We sort of do when we hear the Lamas teach, we hear the Geshis, we hear His Holiness, so precise, so accurate. Got to learn the definitions. But we sort of think, oh, that's philosophy. I'm not a philosopher. I want to just practice, please. Well, it's like saying, you look at all those strange little marks on the music and say, oh, that's too intellectual. I'd rather just play the piano, please. Well, excuse me, you cannot play Bach until you've learned the little notes on the piece of paper. You've got to squeeze your brain first and learn the theories. Then you can play the music. It's exactly the same here. So the 2 modes of meditation are perfect, but you first listen to the teachings. Then you have to go home. The best practitioner in the monasteries, they say, is after the class, they go straight home, get into focus, go to the 2nd mode, and think it through until the penny drops, until the insights come, until you've got it in your mind. This is how we learn anything. We know this. You've got to study any exam, we've got to really study hard. And then we learn the words and we write it out and we pass the exam. It's exactly the same here. What makes us think it's different? We can say the word karma, but if we can't speak about it in a logical, intelligent way about what karma is, how many kinds, how does it work, this, then we can't say we understand karma. It's not possible. We just have faith in karma, which is maybe better than nothing. But it won't get us far. Having faith that 1 + 1 is 2 is fine because it's right, but it won't get you far. You'll never get much experience. You won't be able to help anybody else. And it won't go very deep. Faith is too shaky, It's got to be based in logic. This is the point here. So to familiarize our mind with that which is true, and then we think, well, how do I know it's true? Of course, it's the logical question. Well, you can't know it's true until you've listened to it and thought about it and proved it for yourself. There's no shortcut. But sometimes we prefer to believe. Even as Buddhists. I remember it was in Portland at Rinpoche Centre. And, they're studying all very seriously there. And there's one of the students there, quite serious, studying very hard. And then we were discussing the different views about emptiness, the different Buddhist views about emptiness. And he said, well, whom am I supposed to believe? But this is the point. Nobody. You've got to work it out yourself. This is so almost scary to us, And because we're so used to believing that it's just some sort of secret thing inside here. So many times we have the question, I've seen this a lot, we say, well, how do I know I'm doing the right thing? Or even discussing yesterday what decisions to make. How do I know if I've made the right decision? How do I know what's right? How do I know what's beneficial? Well, if you were learning music and you ask yourself, how do I know I'm playing it right? It's not some mystical thing. You simply refer to the music because that's what you're learning. You refer to the music, the theoretical basis. The same here. If we're choosing to practice Buddhism, it assumes we've thought about the Buddha. It assumes we've had confidence in him as a valid person. And so the way to say it, this is what I say to myself, we assume it's our working hypothesis. So how do I know if I'm thinking correctly? Well, it depends what you're thinking. If it's music, you refer to the music. If it's mathematics, you refer to the maths. If it's Buddhism, you refer to what Buddha said. It's not rocket science. You don't look inside and think some kind of mysterious thing will come that will tell you it's right. That's naive, When eventually you experienced it as the truth, then you can trust your inner wisdom. But first we refer to the external set of rules, whether it's music, maths, or Buddhism. Exactly the same. They're right out there in the teachings, So we need to study them. So important. And then learn them. First theoretically and then experientially. One step at a time. And that, of course, is when the fundamental changes occur in our mind. It's obvious. So it's so interesting then we think of Buddha saying, the point of meditation is 2 things. The thing we need to familiarize our mind with is two things, that which is true and that which is virtuous, because that finally, when that's perfected, that's what a Buddha's mind is. And this is the point that's fascinating about Buddha's teachings, is that he says that one of the key qualities of an enlightened mind, as we know, is actually called omniscience. Just like I learned when I was a Catholic, God is omniscient. And it's a shocking concept, actually, to think even that ordinary people can learn to cognize everything that exists correctly. That's what it means, familiarizing our mind with that which is true. This is Buddha's absolute point. This is his incredible point, his own incredible finding. And this is why mind in Buddhism is completely central. So there's no information out there that's come from on high. There's no concept like that in Buddhism. There's nothing to be reified. Everything that does exist, Buddha says, is necessarily cognizable by mind. In fact, when you learn Buddhist philosophy, there are various synonyms for that which exists: phenomenon, object of knowledge, established base, existent. There are 4 of them. There are more, but I can't remember. Well, the definition of an existent, of something that exists, the definition is that which can be cognized by mind. Huh? What was that? Somebody helping me there? What did you say? Never mind. Doesn't matter. I don't want to confess to speaking. Oh, were we? We are having? I'm having? Oh, I see. Okay. Am I boring you? We're okay here? We're enjoying? We're getting... I find this a very wonderful point, actually. So delicious. That which exists in the universe is necessarily that which mind can cognize. So it's axiomatic. So this really proves the centrality of mind for the Buddha. And given that we are a mind possessor, the term in Tibetan for a sentient being is semchen, mind possessor. This is why the Mahayana teachings would say logically every mind possesses the potential for perfection, for Buddhahood, for omniscience. This one characteristic of an enlightened mind, cognizing that which exists without mistake. And this is pointing to the really crucial, very specific way Buddha talks about why we suffer and why we are miserable, and why we don't cognize right now, which is a shocking concept already, things that exist, because of these neuroses in our mental consciousness. It's like we were discussing yesterday, we have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. And our mental consciousness is, as Lama Zopa puts it, is where all the workshop is. All the thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, all stored away in our computer in here, And so this mental consciousness is what we have to learn to completely transform. We have to learn to familiarize that with that which is true, or another way to put it, we have to fill our mind with that which is true and with that which is virtuous. And like I said, these two come together. These two come together. For the Buddha, in these 3 categories of states of mind, the crucial ones for us to learn to really delve into and to get to distinguish between are the ones called the virtuous and the non-virtuous, the negative and the positive, roughly speaking, these ones. And there's a huge difference between these 2 states of mind. Now, in our materialist world and in ourselves sort of instinctively, we give equal status to anger, jealousy, love, compassion. We sort of know that, a reasonable person has a fairly good balance of all of these. We sort of accept this. There's no concept in any of the modern models of the mind that we talk about in modern world psychology that would indicate even a remote possibility, like I mentioned before, that you can get rid of all neuroses, or that certainly you can develop wisdom that is in sync with all reality. This seems madness, and this is Buddha's point, and that's his own direct finding. And all his teachings are laying out exactly the methods, the methodologies for how to accomplish this. And this is why His Holiness points out, if you follow Buddha's steps one at a time and actually practice, and then you get to a point where you do the practice, like you apply the recipe, but you don't get the result, then you have proven that Buddha is wrong, and you must reject him. So it really means we are really the boss. So what's fascinating about these positive and negative qualities, you could say one of the ways that Buddha talks about the negative ones, and this is what we need to understand by looking inside, is that the two main characteristics of the negative ones are, one, that they're liars. This is even, the word delusion. It's a brilliant word too in English. I found that in other languages, there's not a really good word in English as a translation for this. Delusion. It's a very accurate word. When someone accuses you of being delusional, you're really offended because it means you're not in touch with reality. And this is precisely Buddha's intent. This is exactly what he's saying. That right now our minds are familiar with things that are not true, things that aren't real, with lies. This is what he's saying. And when we begin to observe this characteristic of our own neuroses, which indicate, because then we look at the other characteristic, which is the emotional pain, the disturbingness. They call them disturbing emotions, afflictive mental afflictions. These are all indicating the other characteristic, the pain. Look at the pain. Look at the last time you were jealous. It's so painful. And then look at these two together, the pain and the hurt, and then the lying nonsense. This is why we are non-virtuous, why we harm others. This is why we harm others. And of course, all these neuroses, having these specific characteristics of being extremely disturbing and extremely delusional, they're rooted in this root delusion, which is the main one, finally, that we have to rid our minds of. And that's when we've, quotes, realized emptiness. That's the final one to go. So what's interesting, the root delusion, as they refer to it, known in Tibetan as ma-rigpa, unawareness, this fundamental ignorance of how things actually, finally, ultimately, truly exist. This is how Buddha's talking. And so all the other delusions, like the branch delusions, attachment, anger, jealousy, all the others, which we are so familiar with, which we think are so natural, which we think of as emotions, feelings, they all are possessing the same characteristics as each other. They're all liars. It's a question of how they lie, And so when we begin to observe this, first know it intellectually by studying Buddhist psychology, and then can identify it inside our own mind, then we are really on track in being a Buddhist. This is the specific approach, unique to Buddha, that he takes for what suffering is and how to get rid of it. Because what he's saying is that we suffer because of these delusions. Because the way they say it in Buddhist psychology, depending on whatever lie is in the mind, whatever neurotic emotion is running the show, what appears to us out there, the way they say it, what appears to us out there, beautiful people, ugly people, fearful things, delicious cake, ugly this, nice that, whatever it is, and every second of the day, the world appears to us in a certain way. So, of course, we think, Buddha says, that the way we see things, or the way they say it in Buddhist psychology, the way things appear to us, we assume this is how they exist. We assume this without a millionth of a fraction of a second of doubt. This is what being samsaric means. Buddha says we're totally addicted from countless lives of, as Lama Zopa puts it, believing in our karmic appearances. And it's really hard to even hear this, much less comprehend it. But as they say in Buddhist psychology, actually, in reality, everything appears to us out there they say it like this, in the aspect of what's in our mind. In other words, whatever is in our mind at any given moment, that is what causes things out there to appear like that. This is quite shocking. Who would have thought? You know? So when we see the delicious cake on the plate, it appears to really be delicious, doesn't it? It's like vibrating deliciousness, just like begging me to eat it. Isn't it? It's like I feel like this victim of it. The cake's just dragging me to it. And I feel it's like not my fault. It's the cake's fault. Look, you know? I'm going to sound like a funny example. This sounds like a very funny example, but it's really the same. When I was a feminist, years and years and years ago, I was a radical feminist, and I was living in London. And, you know, one of my policies, might sound ridiculous, but never mind, I'm confessing, okay? I was a really extreme radical feminist. This is when I was in my late 20s, I think. So anyway, I was a nice-looking girl. I had a nice chest, you know, and you understand my point. So, and I remember at the time having this policy that any man who would whistle at me or say something about my nice chest, which was, of course, not considered politically incorrect then, you'd probably get arrested by now, I think, if you say something, isn't it? So, it sounds very peculiar, but it's the same thing. So I remember this fellow, this old bloke, said something about it. And then one of my policies was I would abuse him out loud on the street in front of everybody. And the poor man would be so embarrassed. Of course he would, you know. It was my policy. I just did that. Or I'd even do more. I'd even punch a fellow. You know, one time I punched. Never mind. But I remember this man, when I was rude to him and insulted him for saying something about me, he nearly cried. He said, if you don't want me to say anything, why do you look like that? It's like blaming the cake. Oh, you're supposed to laugh then. You didn't get it at all, did you? Did you get it? Okay, good. That's what we do. We really believe it's the cake looking so delicious, just trying to seduce me. That I'm just this victim, aren't I? Well, this poor man, I really felt sorry for him. He really felt like he was a victim of mine looking like this, which is sort of the classic male-female thing. It's the girl's fault, isn't it? I mean, as Catholics, remember, it was my sin if you boys got excited. The same here, well, the Catholics, isn't it? This is the whole idea, you know. This is the way attachment works. You feel like this victim enthralled by this thing out there, and we feel this way. We really feel it's not our fault. This is the way ego works. It's completely fascinating. And the whole world is like this. So then the ugly person, of course, when you are mean to me, absolutely everything in me feels I'm allowed to be angry. How dare you do that to me? So this is what Lama Yeshe would refer to ego as the self-pity me. It's a very tasty way to put it. It feels kind of cruel, but really that's the way ego is. It's the strongest aspect of ego, which is not how we think instinctively, because we think ego is strong and big. But ego is like an infant that just is dragged from pillar to post, but pulled by the nose, you know, by all the things out in the world, believing I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault. It's the cake's fault, it's his fault, it's her fault, it's God's fault, it's somebody else's fault. This is the way ego works. Because and this is the shock that Buddha's putting upon us, that actually it's nothing to do with the cake. It's my mind calling it that, believing it is that, addicted to believing it's this, and this is the part that makes us all suffer. And it gets more and more subtle, more and more deep in the way that these things out there appear to us in this way. The subtlest one, of course, is they're having no inherent cake. You know, attachment sees a delicious cake. You know, maybe Veronica looks and she hates chocolate cake, so it'll look ugly to her. She'll believe in an ugly cake. I'll believe in a delicious cake. But both of us also will be believing in a self-existent delicious cake, a self-existent ugly cake, the cake out there from its own side, having nothing to do with me. This is how the world appears. This is how we suffer, Buddha says. This is the nightmare of samsara. We dump all the responsibility out there. And we can see when we understand this how attachment and aversion, the two main delusions that we run between 1,000 times a day, which are the ones that are projecting deliciousness, the attachment believes that thing out there will cause me happiness, so I run around desperate to get it. And the aversion for that ugly person believes he's the cause of my suffering, so I want to push him away. These are both logical consequences of this ego grasping, this ignorance, this mat-rigpa, the root delusion. There's natural consequences of this. It's all the point of reifying things, putting them out there, feeling I'm separate from everything and having nothing to do with it. As Lama Zopa says, I mentioned yesterday, most of us in the world, until we start looking into our mind, don't think our mind plays any role at all. This is what ignorance is, you know. It's terrifying. So it's like we have to wake up to our own mind. Wake up to the way, as Lama Zopa says, everything out there is our own karmic appearance. Meaning, according to the imprints we put into our mind in the past, the programming, we are born with a certain tendency, a certain mind, with karma with certain people who do certain actions to us. There's not a single thing we would meet. This is understanding karma, you know, which is junior school. There's not a single thing that would happen to us. There's not a single event that occurs. There's not a single person who does this or that to me that would happen if I hadn't created the cause for it to happen. This is why the first step in Buddhism is understanding karma. The first step, the beginning of practice, is merely abiding by the laws of karma, and then slowly we need to get some comprehension of it, you know, some intelligent understanding, which gets us right back to this view about understanding morality. That for the Buddha, morality is a natural law. No one made it up. Just do some market research in this room and we can discover immediately what morality is. It's what people like having done to them. People like to be generous, like to have people be kind to us. Generosity, all these good things. And immorality is necessarily that which harms another. Nothing to do with God. Buddha didn't make it up. It's not coming from on high. It's a natural law. It's pretty easy. So where Buddha comes in is more like an advisor, like a doctor, who has discovered, you know, like I said yesterday, that if you kill Robina, it is an action that is defined by one that harms another, but my doing it is what causes me suffering. This is the toughest one. And this is why if we have the superficial, dualistic view of morality, which is some law imposed from on high, whether the judge or the government or mummy or God, then we'll always have this childish view of being seen to be good, but then hiding our bad, getting away with something. Whereas with the view of karma, there is no such concept. There can't be. Because it's a natural law that negativity produces my suffering. Just like smoking cigarettes cause cancer. No one does it to you. You put cancer and lungs, you could put cigarettes and lungs together, it could produce cancer. This is the basic level of teachings in Buddhism. And to get these really clear, this is the really sound basis for proper practice. Understanding what morality is and understanding why we choose to not be immoral, why we choose to not kill, not lie, not steal. Not because Buddha said, not because I look like a nice, good girl, because that's the method, first step, to stop me from suffering. This is why we have to know about our own suffering first. That's why we have to have being fed up with suffering, which is what renunciation is. We have to know this, which means we have to look into our own minds. There's just no choice. Then we have a basis for proper compassion. So understanding our mind in this, in these initial stages, as I'm saying, is crucial to really understand how to look into the eight worldly dharmas, how to understand transforming problems, and how to develop love and compassion, which is all the context. Which is the most advanced. This is why it's in the compassion wing. It's on the basis of success in the wisdom wing, which is junior school and high school. Which means we must understand karma, and we must, even the minimum basics, and we must understand the mind. Not physical, continuity of mental moments, not a product of your brain, and mental consciousness has got the negative, the positive, and the neutral states. So at the moment, our mind is really, we know we feel things, there's no doubt. But we don't notice what we feel until it hits the body, which is when we call it an emotion. But it's way, way too late. You know, this is why we need to learn how to focus the mind, and so we can start to listen to what's happening in our own head, you know. This is absolutely crucial. Fundamental. This is being a Buddhist, actually. The first stage is a don't kill, don't lie, don't steal. That's shared by any reasonable person. But it's the basis for the Buddha. Then you really become a Buddhist, you could say, in the middle scope. You really become a Buddhist there, unique to the Buddha. His own incredible approach to the way the mind works. And this is where we get to the root of the problem, the causes of suffering. You know, in the second noble truth, in the Four Noble Truths, the second one is where Buddha points out the two main causes of suffering. Two main causes. And what's shocking to us, and indeed the two main causes of happiness, the same logic. What's shocking to us is they're both inside me. You know, not someone else. We're so convinced if someone's kind to me that they're the cause of my happiness, and someone's mean to me that they're the cause of my suffering. That's the default mode of all sentient beings. In samsara, that's us. Look at everybody. Look at the world. We can deduce that's the philosophy of the world. But this is not the Buddha's view at all. He doesn't argue that, you know, that Fred didn't punch you in the nose. He doesn't argue with that. He just says that's only a secondary cause, Robina. That's merely a catalyst for your suffering, it's such a shocking point. But this is the essential point about karma. That whatever I experience out there, the main cause of it is coming from me, from the past. I programmed my mind with virtue that then ripens as you're being kind to me. I program my mind with non-virtue that when it ripens, you're unkind to me. And your unkindness is merely the catalyst for the ripening of my negative seed. Your kindness is merely the catalyst for the ripening of my virtuous seed. This is a simple law of karma. It really isn't complicated intellectually, but it's so opposite to what we think, we can't even articulate it. It's so confusing to us. In fact, it's so fascinating. When you study Buddhist psychology, you know, you learn the 51 mental factors. This term they use, mental factor. It's a term that really we would say is a state of mind. That's the term we would say in English, a state of mind. Mental factor is that what they call it. So this text of 51, which is actually a Hinayana teaching, that's taught mainly in the context of learning to meditate. There are, in fact, in our mind, thousands of states of mind, mental factors. So many variations of attachment, so many variations of every single one of them. But these 51 are kind of important to get. So there's one grouping there called the five always present mental factors. And it's really fascinating. One of them is called feeling. So this word we use synonymously with emotion, but it's not the meaning here. The Buddhist meaning of feeling, every second of the day that we're existing, we're having either a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. Every millisecond, we're having one of these. And so then these three, simply speaking, okay, if you were to track your day, how'd you go today, Robina? Well, 9 o'clock I drove down the road, and at 10 o'clock the car broke down, 11 o'clock someone smiled at me, and 12 o'clock I had lunch. We would always track our day in external terms, wouldn't we? What happened out there? Well, being Buddhist, we should track it internally. So we did a little graph, Well, 9 o'clock I was fairly unhappy, and then at 10 o'clock I was really miserable, 11 o'clock I was very happy, and then it sort of went up and down, happy like a graph, And if you knew your mind well enough, we would be able to track it this way. Well, the point is, in the Buddhist view, what happens is this. There's a chocolate cake out there, okay? My eye consciousness sees brown triangle. In a millisecond, it tracks my mental consciousness, where all the information is stored. I then come up with the label. I then remember I've eaten it in the past. I remember that I've liked it in the past. I can even recognize that it's a good chocolate cake. Maybe it won the medal in the chocolate cake show. All this is happening in a millisecond, and then I project all of that information onto the chocolate cake. And then I put the chocolate cake in my mouth, right? And it triggers a good feeling. Would we agree if you like chocolate cake? That's a normal thing would happen. It would trigger a good feeling. So this is the point. This is the shocking point. The shocking point. We truly believe that the good feeling I just did indeed feel when cake met my tongue, we really believe the feeling of pleasure, which did exist, we believe the cake caused it. It didn't. This is a technical point. It merely was a trigger. Please hear me. All it did was trigger a virtuous karmic seed from when I planted it way back in my big bank vault of virtuous karmic seeds, which I have stored there, luckily. It triggered the ripening of one of those in a moment of pleasure. So that moment of pleasure is actually the fruit of a past virtue. And the cake is merely the catalyst. Now, this is why samsara is so hard to get out of. Because when people, because we're so, attachment, okay, it's multifaceted. We come into this life, Buddha says, completely programmed with so much practice of attachment from past lives. And the way it manifests at the most energetic level is this level of dissatisfaction, this incredible feeling that we all have, some worse than others, that really is that we are never satisfied. This terrible feeling of distress, that I'm not content, I'm not satisfied. And then, of course, what that causes is there must be something missing in here, so we start looking for something out there. This is samsara. And so then hungrily looking for something that will look delicious, that then I believe, and this is the attachment taking over, then it causes the cake to look delicious. Then it causes me to believe that when I get the cake, it'll calm the dissatisfaction. It will give me pleasure. It will make me satisfied. And then as I'm eating it, even as I'm eating it, I'm already anticipating the next piece because I'm not satisfied yet. And I keep expecting happiness to come, keep expecting it until eventually I have to stop because I'd vomit if I didn't. Right? Is this not true? This is samsara, Buddha says. The peakest, most blissful pleasure or the most mild pleasure. It's the same logic, exactly the same. The attachment in us totally believes 1,000,000% that cake is the cause of my happiness. And then when I don't get it, what do I feel? Worse dissatisfaction. But it's like literally Buddha's saying we're completely misinterpreting the entire procedure. It's a complete misinterpretation. And that's what he means by delusions. These are liars in our mind that we are totally addicted to believing. And these are happening 1,000,000,000,000 times a second, every millisecond. This is what's running our minds, this complete buying into the energy and the misconceptions of attachment. Believing totally that anyway, first, I'm nothing, I'm nobody. This is why we have such dissatisfaction, such self-loathing, you could say it. This is the energy of attachment from past lives, that I just feel I'm not enough. And we believe I'm not enough. Then we've got to keep stuffing in the cakes and getting this and getting the praise and getting the reputation and getting that and having this and doing that, endlessly trying to fill up the gaping hole, And the tragedy is, Buddha says, that not only will the cake not bring satisfaction, but the having of it increases your craving of it. As my mother used to say, the more you get, the more you want. And this is the real suffering of attachment. But the most tragic one is that we do experience a good feeling. You can't say you don't. It is a good feeling. And why you even have a moment of good feeling is because you've got virtuous karmic seeds. In other words, we waste our virtuous karmic seeds. We tip them down the toilet. But even worse, for example, I use example about karma. A friend of mine, little boy, when he was like 5, I forget how old he was, the moment he saw fishing, he ran like a magnet. And he spent the rest of his life as a professional fisherman. He was in love with fishing, basically. And this is due to past karma. He's got a karmic imprint from past killing. He gets born in this life. He sees fishing. It's like it wakes up his memory. It's like meeting Romeo and Juliet. You fall in love, Well, he fell in love with fishing. This is what happens. A past tendency to kill. He hadn't purified it by vowing never to kill again. he sees the fishing, and then instantaneously attachment rises, and one of attachment's jobs is to make the object look more delicious. So fishing to him looked dazzlingly beautiful. So he couldn't, so then also like with attachment, we all know this, look at your mind, you think about the object all day. So most of us, you know, it mightn't be the in love level of attachment where you're thinking obsessively day and night about this divine person, but we're driven by this attachment, by this kind of overexcited energy, always looking for something and anticipating something and wanting something. What depression is when you have nothing to find to be attached to. Nothing to look forward to, as we say. That's attachment that runs us. So when attachment's very strong, so then he spent his life, whatever, until he was 29, when he died scuba diving, living as a fisherman, identifying himself every second, thinking about it all the time. He even called himself Salmon. Sal for short. In other words, completely, this is what attachment does. You're completely in love with it. And this is the part. Bad enough with chocolate cake, okay? But it's not a sentient being. You're just harming yourself. You're just harming yourself by stuffing in the chocolate cake. But the fishing, you're harming other sentient beings. And this is the worst part too. This is one of the worst characteristics of attachment. His mother told me she couldn't stand fishing, but she was always very respectful. She didn't want to criticize him. And he would always ask her, come fishing with him, you know. So one day she went, and this is really the point. Because she didn't have an imprint, a tendency to kill, therefore she didn't have attachment to it, she was relatively clear, could see truth pretty clearly, because delusions blind you from seeing truth. All he could see, she saw suffering the moment she looked at those fish. She could tell by their body language they were not happy. It was obvious, you know. She knew they'd rather be in the water, please. He couldn't see it. He was a kind, intelligent man. He literally couldn't see it. This is how delusions lie to us. You'd think it'd be evident that flapping fish, and the poor things, they can't shout, they haven't got a voice, they don't have arms and legs to jump out, you know. I mean, a pig will squeal if you kill it. It's evident it's suffering. But even this he couldn't see because because attachment creates its own story. I was in Canada recently, and it's right up in the north that they kill the baby seals. You know, they bash them to death. So you'd think anybody with half a brain would see that a baby seal being bashed to death on its brains somehow looks like it's suffering. You'd think. But these fellows, because it's the karma they have to be born into that country, the karma to kill in this particular way, that they were in this interview with one of them, he was offended that, you know, people would insult them, would criticize them. This is what we've been taught. This is what we do. They couldn't see suffering. Well, look at us. We mightn't go around bashing baby seals to death. But attachment causes this. You project your story onto this person, this thing, that whatever it is. Bad enough in our relationships, we're not even being mean to each other, but attachment really can harm us. But if you're also harming others because of attachment, like people who torture, people who rape, people who kill, because of attachment, you know, this is the worst thing. Attachment is unbelievable. I'm sure I started off with another reason to talk about this, but never mind, we got to this point. I can't remember. Yeah, distinguishing. I think the main point is we've got to see how profound, how primordially deep it is, and how multifaceted all the delusions are, but attachment's the one. The root of it is this ego grasping. This is even more subtle. But effectively, in day-to-day life, Buddha says, that attachment effectively is the main cause. That he even calls this an attachment realm, a desire realm, a product. We are born in the first place with these bodies of the five senses in a world made up of the five sense objects. That just to exist, we must ingest, you know, through the five senses. We are already existing in suffering just by existing. So it's really hard to see, really hard to see. So the three kinds of suffering, you know, in the first noble truth, Buddha talks about suffering. The first kind of suffering is called the suffering of suffering. And basically that's when the bad things happen, simply speaking, if we think of this world, our life. It's when, in other words, putting it this way, the suffering of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants. or gets what it doesn't want. It's what we call suffering. It's what we normally call suffering. So if the grossest suffering, which we all agree is suffering, is when attachment doesn't get it what it wants, the second kind of suffering is when attachment does get what it wants, which we call happiness. This is where it seems so heavy. Buddha calls this a deeper, more primordial level of suffering, which we actually think is what happiness is. What we think of happiness is what Buddha calls suffering. It seems like unbearable initially. We don't know where to go with that, unless we understand it. We have to understand it. If we don't think it through logically and try and work out what Buddha means by this, we'll just sit there and feel miserable, thinking the Buddha's trying to make us miserable and we're not allowed to have chocolate cake. It's completely ridiculous. We've got to understand the mechanics of these delusions, We must. The third kind of suffering is called all-pervasive suffering. So the way I like to think of it is this. The grossest level of suffering is, assuming you're a junkie, okay? A good way, because attachment is being a junkie, basically. It's just a question of degree for the Buddha. In our ordinary world, you're a junkie or an addict when the attachment's very serious. Well, for the Buddha, having any attachment at all, you're mentally ill. You're a junkie. It is only a question of degree, and that's a really good way to put it. It's exactly Buddha's point. And as Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for a whole year. You'll never begin to understand it until you start looking deeply inside. So the grossest level of suffering, if you're the junkie, is when you don't get the junk. It's like a nightmare, isn't it? Totally like a nightmare. The second level of suffering is when you get the junk. And the third one, it's the only way to put this one, the all-pervasive suffering, it's like you're born in a body of a junkie, having the five senses, that just to exist, and in a world made up of junk. If you get my point. And to exist, you've got to ingest the junk. That's all pervasive suffering. Like you're locked into suffering by being this person. So it's not easy to get beyond it, It's really quite hard. This is why we have to understand logically these teachings. Understand logically, because that's how we apply them in our own mind. Otherwise, we're just acting out of fear and guilt, trying to be a nice person because someone says we should be. Not like that. Or thinking, I shouldn't like chocolate cake, I'm so attached. Not like that. It's more refined than that. It's more precise than that. So anyway, I don't know. Want to ask any questions? Want to ask me some questions? Anybody?
Would aversion be a type of attachment?
So tell me what you think aversion is. Give me an example of when it would arise.
Like, thinking of the chocolate cake.
Yeah.
Like if Veronica doesn't like it,
yes.
that she hates.
That's right.
Chocolate cake.
So that's aversion.
That's the way I see it, but I'm not sure if
aversion, right, exactly.
Aversion.
So when you have attachment for something, how would you respond to it? How would it look?
Good.
And you'd go towards it.
Right.
And you think it's caused you happiness. If you have aversion for it, how would it look?
Disgusting.
Ugly, and you want to walk away.
Yes.
Well, that's the opposite of attachment. Okay. Aversion, you see, it's because you're attached to chocolate cake, when you see carrot cake, you get very upset. Mm-hmm. So the cake will look ugly, won't it? So because of it, this is the point. Because of it, aversion is actually the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So attachment's running the show, this constant assumption that I must get what I want every second. That's how attachment is at a really subtle level. So the millisecond you meet the object that attachment doesn't like, unhappiness arises. And when it's really strong, it's called anger. Do you see?
So it's still a cause for suffering, aversion. A very strong cause for suffering.
God, look at the world. Mm-hmm. Why do you think most people kill themselves and have wars? It's because attachment didn't get what it wanted and it grows into a huge anger. Mm-hmm. Anger is the result of attachment. You wouldn't have anger if you did not have attachment. Okay. We would no way in the universe have aversion, upset, irritation, annoyance, not to mention raging anger if we didn't have attachment. Attachment is the fundamental, and then aversion is the response when it doesn't get what it wants. They're so linked. Do you see?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Somebody else. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm thinking about what you say about being a junkie, living in a world of junk.
That's right. A bit depressing. Isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm thinking what can be done with certain things that we see as such natural things.
Yes, go on.
Like for example, not being a vegetarian
Yes.
and seeing animals as tasty.
Seeing what?
And another one having to or feeling forced to fumigate a house that is being overrun with a plague. And all those things, even the risk of sitting in here and squashing
I know, that's right.
a
A
bug.
creature. Well, this is the thing. One of the things that Buddha says is that being in this samsara and being in samsara isn't some place. It means being caught up in these delusions which cause us to get rebirth after rebirth. So being caught up in this cycle of craziness, he says it's in the nature of suffering. It's just you can't avoid suffering. Like you're saying, Buddha actually says there's not an atom of space where you will not find sentient beings. I mean, even if you had a microscope big enough, you know how all the dust mites, all these billions of creatures in the dust, they're the sentient beings we can even see. Buddha says there are trillions of sentient beings pervading space. There's nowhere you won't find them. So just by existing, we're harming countless creatures all the time. There's no question. And that's why the very first level of practice, sort of to begin to get out of this nightmare, is to develop the intention not to harm whenever we can. This is the really, if you want to summarize one action as the basis of all Buddhist practice, don't harm a sentient being. Have the intention not to harm a sentient being. And this is where it gets very difficult. Like you just said, you know, fumigating these things, living in a climate like you guys must have so many creatures. It's very hard to intend not to harm. But this is the ideal, to intend not to harm a living being. We're going to be harming all the time.
And we make excuses for
We
it
do
all
make
the time.
excuses. We say it like we have to. Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting to, okay, this where, you know, yeah, this is where we really can start to talk a little bit about the purification of karma. Because we create the cause, Buddha says, from our past actions to live in an environment where we feel we are forced to kill. So the baby seal guy, he's due to his past karma, he's born as whatever they use in the Canada term for Eskimos, I forget the name, whatever they call, it's the native people. You're born into that world with the tendency to kill from your past karma, and then and you're born to a family that kills for their life. The fishermen the same. So even if we live in a culture like this where you feel like you're forced to kill the creatures, you know, this is due to our past actions. So it's extra hard to pull ourselves out of it, you know, when the very condition seems to demand that we do it. But this is what's interesting about the whole process of purification of karma, and I'm sure you guys must do it and have studied it. But if it's true, as Buddha's saying, that whatever we meet, whatever situation it is due to our past actions, due to our past karma, then we can change it by purifying. So Lama Zopa says, this purification practice, as you know, called the 4 opponent powers, and let's talk about it. He says we're insane not to do it every day. Because it's sort of, okay, so if we understand, okay, so the 4 opponent powers, the first one, there's 4 ways, okay, there's one way of putting it, 4 ways that our past karma ripens in the present. And what karma is the real best word for it is the word intention. Every millisecond of the mind having an intention, that's what a karma is. It's a mental action. It's just a word referring to what the mind does from moment to moment. That's the real process of karma. It's what the mind does. And then, of course, what my mind does many times is then its wishes are carried out by my body and my speech. You know, so I even the thought, I will walk out the door. Well, believe me, my legs will not stay here. If my thought says I will walk out the door, you'll see me stand up and walk out the door. My legs do the job of my mind. If I don't like you and I say I'm going to punch you, sure enough, I'm going to punch you. You see my fist go out, you know. I'm not sitting here thinking, oh, I love you so much. Definitely not. So that's really what karma is, but first and foremost it's the mind. And every millisecond we're sowing seeds, having intentions. And why do we have those intentions? Because we've had those intentions before, because we've practiced those intentions. So here we are with the negative karmic seeds and from negative actions before. Okay, and this is where it gets the fundamentals of morality. What is a negative action? Remember, one that harms another. Using my body and speech to kill that mouse. But why it's negative for me when I do it isn't just the mere thought, I will kill the mouse. If we unpack intention, you're going to find underneath intention, there's a crucial part there called motivation, called reason. So what makes my action of killing negative isn't the mere killing of the mouse. It's because I want to harm the mouse. It's called aversion. It's called anger. You'll see, it's obvious. Ugh, disgusting. It's just called anger. It's all aversion. So the reason I want to kill the mouse, as we'd put it, or motivation, as the lamas say, is what informs my intention. That's what makes it negative for me. That's what sows the negative imprint in my mind. It's the wish to harm the mouse. So you might have a mouse in your kitchen, and you see it suffering, and you have this huge compassion, and then you think, like many people, I'll kill it, and that will stop its suffering. So the killing, in your case, is still an intention. The mouse is there. You do the action. The mouse dies. That's a complete action. Mine's the same. Intention, object, action, result. But look at the difference in the mind. You have in your mind full of compassion. You want to help the mouse. You want to help the mouse. That's called compassion. You could argue you create not bad karma, you even create good karma. But you don't help the mouse. Don't think you do. That's another discussion. That's where there's no wisdom. The compassion's not enough, as His Holiness says. You need wisdom. And that's where you've got to think about, okay, did I help the mouse when I killed it? You meant to help it. You wanted to help it. Your compassion from your side is virtuous karma. You could say that. But if the mouse went from the frying pan into the fire, it took a worse rebirth than you didn't help it at all. But still, from your point of view, you had compassion. From you, it's fine. But you've got to have wisdom as well to really help sentient beings. So in my case, it's clearly negative, not because I killed the mouse, but because I wanted to kill the mouse. I wanted to harm it. That's what makes it negative for me. So when we understand this is the basics of how we create karma, what's going on in our mind. Every single being does actions all the time. We're doing actions every millisecond, all the creatures, all the ants, all the giraffes, the dogs, the humans, driven by karma. We are driven by our past mental habits. This is the tragedy of it, We're driven by our past mental habits, totally programmed, many of them. So to change this is really huge. And the changing process has 4 steps as well. The first step, they're often taught in a different order, but this order is really helpful. The first one, in English I like to think of them as the 4 R's. It helps you remember. Regret is the first one. And this is, again, a really clear one to understand. When we say regret, we mostly think guilt. This is a complete mistake. And I always quote this, but His Holiness was asked one time, what's the difference between guilt and regret? So the guilt that we know is this. His Holiness said, well, guilt is you look in the past and you say, I did this and I did that and I did this, and then you say, and I'm a bad person, right? We're very familiar with this. Well, basically that's useless. That's no accountability. There's no responsibility. That's just self-blame. It's exactly the same as anger. You did this and you did that and you did this and you're a bad person. It's exactly the same as anger, blaming someone. And here we blame ourselves. But it's not productive. Nothing changes. You just get more miserable. And this is very instinctive for us. This is the way ego works right now. We automatically become hopeless. That's why we don't like to admit our mistakes. We would rather hide them. It's too painful. But regret, His Holiness said, and it's so simple, the difference. But we really have to cultivate it because it doesn't come naturally for us. So regret, you look in the past and you say, I did do this and I did do that and I did do this. But then you say, what can I do to change? What can I do? That's when it becomes productive. And that's the real process of purification. Lama Zopa says this is the most important step because it opens the door to the rest of the steps. You've got to own responsibility for the fact that I did kill, I did lie, I did badmouth, I did do this, I did cheat on my wife, or whatever the negative action is, without shame, without over-exaggerating it with what guilt, which is what guilt does, but owning it like an adult. It's like we have to grow up, you know. So this is when we go through the process of purification. You do the practice every day. As Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to. We just don't do our Vajrasattva mantras. Many of us have taken the initiation. It's the purification mantra. And we say, oh, I've done my Vajrasattva mantras. Well, you didn't do all the 4 steps. You need to do the 4 steps because purification needs all 4. It's a psychological process, you know. The first one, regret, is so important. It demands we acknowledge I killed, lied, steal, whatever. And then you think, and whatever I have done with my body and speech since beginningless time. Because every single negative action I've done in the past that hasn't yet ripened as my suffering is sitting there in my bank vault waiting to ripen as my suffering. And hey, I am sick of suffering. So this whole approach of regret is really spelling out you regret having done those actions because why, you say to yourself, because you know what, Robina, I don't want any more suffering. I am sick of suffering. Now that's a fact. But it's forcing us to own responsibility rather than just making it feel like guilt. I'm a bad person. That's not relevant. It's not even true. You're not a bad person. Your actions are rubbish. Like the Catholics say, you don't criticize the sinner, you criticize the sin. It's the same point. So the reason for regret, you've got to get this, is because I don't want suffering. I am sick of suffering. It's like compassion for yourself. We've got to cultivate this, but it means we have to spell it out. Just to say I regret it, we feel guilt, and that's not relevant. It's not the point. You've got to spell it out. Why do I regret, you've got to say? Because it's left a seed in my mind that will ripen as my suffering at some point, and I know I don't want more suffering. That's a truth we all know. But we've got to speak it out. It's a very powerful step. So then, of course, the next step is logical. Well, you say, well, like as if you've eaten poison, you know it'll cause you sickness, so naturally the next step is, oh my God, whom can I turn to? Where's the doctor? That's refuge, the second step. Reliance, reliance. 2 parts. The first part is refuge, and the attitude here, this is where it's so different from our traditional Catholic upbringing, for example, where you turn to God, because he's the creator, you beg him to forgive you. Well, like I said before, that's not relevant here. It's just not the issue. It doesn't arise. Forgiveness isn't the point here. You're using the Buddha just like your doctor. You've checked on the Buddha, you know he's valid, and 2, you want his methods, you want his medicine, because you are sick of suffering. So, you know, that's what reliance on the Buddha means. That's what refuge means. You've got to have a confidence in the Buddha that is valid, and you want his methods, because you are the one who will take the medicine. You will heal yourself. You just rely upon the Buddha. He doesn't do it. This is a really important point. We're the boss, not Buddha. So then the second part of this reliance, as they call it, is where we have compassion for others now. The first reason to regret, we just think, oh, well, it's because I did a bad thing. We don't spell it out. We have to spell it out. I regret because I do not want the suffering that will come from this. You be very sincere about it. Now we have compassion for those we harmed. Now we can regret for their sake. I must purify for their sake. And indeed for those who've harmed us, if we can have compassion for them too. The third step is the remedy. So if you do the Vajrasattva, you're visualizing Buddha above your head, you do certain visualization, and you recite the mantra. But there's a whole kit bag, there's a whole medicine cabinet of medicines in Buddha, thousands of techniques that you can use as medicine. This is said to be, by all the lamas, the most potent, the most marvelous, this recitation of the mantra of Vajrasattva. And Vajrasattva is the main Buddha in Tantra. He's a white version of Vajradhara, who is the main Buddha in Tantra. You know, Shakyamuni Buddha is the main Buddha in the Sutra teachings. The main actual Buddha, is the word Buddha actually refers to enlightened mind, known as the Dharmakaya, the enlightened consciousness, the omniscient, all-knowing, all-seeing, all-pervasive consciousness of a Buddha that pervades the universe and knows everything and has infinite compassion. That's actual Buddha. But we need the relative Buddha, which is the form of the Buddha. So in all the regular teachings, that's Mr. Shakyamuni Buddha, the prince of 2,500 years ago, the monk, you know? That's the relative Buddha. So in Tantra, the main Buddha is called Vajradhara. the main Buddha. I remember asking Lama Yeshe when I first met the Dharma, and I liked this word, Vajradhara. I used to type the teachings, and I kept coming up with this name, Vajradhara, and I kept liking him. And I said to Lama Yeshe, who's Vajradhara, Lama? He said, he's the biggest Buddha, dear. And I was very impressed. I liked the biggest Buddha. I think that was my main thing. Anyway, Vajradhara, the blue with a Dorjian bell, he's the main Buddha in Tantra. And then Vajrasattva is a white version of him. And I think he's particularly powerful for purification because he represents emptiness, the union of emptiness and the Dorji and the bell crossed, union of the two wings, method and wisdom. So then underneath that Buddha is where all the other Buddhas come in. You have the 5 Buddha families, and they're all just representing different states of mind. Then under those 5 families, all the other Buddhas, because they're all just representations of different states of mind that we are trying to cultivate or trying to purify. Maybe we'll discuss this all later. So anyway, Vajrasattva is said to be the most potent medicine for the purification. But just doing anything good is a good purification and is a good remedy. But the really potent one is this one, they all say, this 3rd step, the mantra and the visualization. And the 4th step, Pabonka Rinpoche says, is the most important. Resolve. This is where you determine to change. You make a decision to change. And this is the point, if we think of karma, like this fisherman example, this little boy, we can deduce from the fact that he had a tendency to kill, that he'd been in the lower realms in the past as the result of killing. The karma ran out, he finished that karma, but the tragedy was he hadn't purified all aspects of the karma, and this is why these 4 steps are said to be so incredibly important. Because he hadn't purified all aspects, he got like miraculously, he got a human life again, because there's 4 ways that karma ripens, okay? The type of rebirth, in his case, he got a human birth. Virtue ripened at the time of his death. He got a human rebirth. But he had the other tracks of karma also. The next one was, it's called experiences, similar to the cause. So he was born into a very good life with good parents, in nice family, good friends, he had a good, really good karma as a result. Very good things, called experiences similar to the cause. The next kind is called the tendencies, your actions similar to the cause, all your tendencies. So he had lots of good tendencies. He was very intelligent, very kind, very generous. But the tragedy was, because he hadn't completely purified all the aspects of the killing karma by regretting and doing these 4 steps, he had this residual result of killing, which was to continue to kill. And that's the worst one. This is the tragedy. His entire life just tipped down the toilet. So when he died, the lower realms again. In fact, this awful story, it's a dramatic story, because I met this mother at Courtin Monastery in the 90s. She came and was in tears because she'd just heard the teachings from Lama Zopa Rinpoche about karma. And she said her son had died 5 years before. He was scuba diving and he drowned. He was 29 and he'd spent his life being a professional fisherman. So she thought, of course, initially that he died doing what he loved. People talk like this. But then she heard about karma, and she kind of got a shock. So she came to me and she said, well, where do you think he's reborn? She was thinking about karma. So I said, well, I don't know, but go and talk to Geshe Lama Kontrog. This amazing Lama was a Sergei Lama, same as Geshe Sopa. He knew Geshe Sopa, I think, not the same class. He was a student like Lama Yeshe, but maybe he was a student of Geshe Sopa as well, I don't remember. Anyway, he was a Sergei Lama, and when he left in Tibet, he went up to the mountains and he spent his life in meditation. And then he spent the last 20 years of his life at Courtin Monastery. He'd spent years, Lama Zopa said he lived in Vajrayogini's Pure Land. He was meditated up in the caves, naked, in 6 foot of snow in winter, and a little hole in the wall with no door, no clothes, no food, no sleep. He was Vajrayogini, basically. Blissful, amazing yogi. So he spent years and years in secret meditation. And then eventually, anyway, he came down to Courtin. And Lama Yeshe said that Lama Yeshe passed away at Courtin in about 1982, that's where Yangtze Rinpoche was first, he was in the care of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, Yangtze Rinpoche, when he was a little boy. Because he was the reincarnation of Lama Yeshe's guru, Yangtze Rinpoche is. You know all this, I think. So anyway, Lama Yeshe, when Lama Yeshe passed away in 82, 84, Lama Zopa said all the smiles went away at Courtin. But when Geshe Lama Kontrog came, all the smiles came back. So he spent the last 20 years of his life. So anyway, he was there, and I said to her, why don't you go and see Geshe Kontrok? Ask him. And these lamas never tell you what they see normally, because, of course, clairvoyance is one of their low-level realizations, you know. So she went to see him, and she mentioned her son's name, and she said, where is he reborn? And he kind of checked his computer, basically, his inner computer. Just like instantaneous, you know. And he said, oh, first he was born in the animal realms, and now he is in the hell realms. And she was shocked. And she said, oh, no, what can I do for him? And it was very moving. Geshe Kontrok said, he kind of laughed sadly and said, what do you mean for him? He said, for everybody. And this woman is not even a Buddhist. I saw her years later. I always tell this story. And she said it was very moving for her to hear this, you know. It really helped her mind, which is unusual because they normally never tell you what they see. It was very powerful. So there he is, having not purified in the past, having the lower realms, which finish the main karma, but the residual result, which is the tendency to keep killing. That's what the tendencies are. Look at the tendencies we have. We mightn't go around killing many beings. We lie, we steal, we eat too much, we think about sex all day, we want to harm people. All these tendencies we have, killing especially. This one we're talking, this is your question, I'm getting to all your question, you know. The tendency to kill and even being born in an environment where you feel you're forced to kill. This is because we haven't purified all aspects. This is why Lama Zopa says we're insane not to do it every day. Because, this is the point, the 4 steps altogether are what purify, but they each specifically purify each of the 4 ways that karma ripens. So there's another example I always tell about a little boy also, the son of another friend. When he was about 3 or 4, I can't remember how old, and she's taking the lice out of his head. And he's crying with compassion. Mummy, Mummy, don't hurt them. It's their home. Leave them alone. So both little boys had not been taught by their mummy, believe me, to kill or to not kill. But where did one child, why his? Because we can deduce logically he must have purified the tendency to kill from vowing never to kill again, which is the 4th step. And the environmental karma. So the environmental karma, let's say, of the baby seal killer, or living in Puerto Rico where you've got steamy summers and lots of creatures, right? Lots of creatures? Okay. So, you know, you've got the karma to meet, you've got an environment of sentient beings where you feel like you've got to kill them. I mean, I know in India one time in the rainy season, not the rainy season, at the end of the rainy season in Varanasi, I was in this hotel, and the glass doors, you know, it was like Jurassic Park. I mean, these big creatures bashing up against the doors. I mean, you go to the Bodh Gaya Stupa, and as the sun goes down, the whole ground is a carpet of these beings, you know. It's like it's unbelievable karma. Do you understand? It's unbelievable. You've got an environment of creatures who are like begging to be killed, you know. You understand? It's awful. So, of course, we all think, oh, it's all out there and it's not fair. And like you said, make excuse. But who created the reality for you to be born as an Eskimo to have to bash baby seals to death? Who created the cause for you to meet fishing? Who created the cause for you to meet mosquitoes? We did. So we've got to purify it. And this is what the 4 opponent powers does. So regret is the one that purifies the kind of karma called experiences similar to the cause. So one of the results, all the karmas have all 4, you can have any or all of the 4 results. So killing, one example, killing. If you have the complete result, it's born in the lower realms. If you have the tendency, it's obvious, you keep killing. If you have the experience similar to the cause, you will get killed. You will die young, or you'll get sick. Environmental result, generally, you could be surrounded by people who die early, or kind of, you know, also very polluted. The food makes you sick. You know, dirty air, filthy food, ugly environment. That's the environmental result of killing. So these 4 are purified by each of these four opponent powers. So regret purifies the experience similar to the cause, which is you getting killed, you being sick, you dying young. So if you have incredible regret for the killing you've done, that aspect is purified by this one. Maybe not necessarily in this life, but you can certainly, it can help change it, but certainly next life, there's no question. You've cleaned it up. The second one, environmental, is purified, the compassion, I think, part. This one I don't quite understand. How the reliance I think compassion part especially, maybe refuge as well. It purifies environmental karma. They have this saying that the ground you fall down on is the very ground that you rely upon to stand up. So the very sentient beings you've harmed are those you now cultivate compassion for. So they talk about how that purifies environmental karma, which is doesn't just mean the 4 elements, but the house you live in, the environment you live in, the people around you, you know. So the third one, obvious, doing the actual remedy, the mantra, the visualization, that purifies the lower realms. And the fourth one, the most important, as Bhavanka Rinpoche says, is the vow never to kill again. What do you think that purifies? Obvious. The tendency. You'll wake up with no thought to kill. And you'll wake up with not even... I mean, I'm not so perfect in my life, for sure. I'm a maniac. But I've never had the karma much to kill, you know. I even went fishing one time to impress a boyfriend. He was pulling out the fish. No fish came to me. I didn't have fish who wanted to be killed by me, you know. Because I had no... And I have to say, as a Buddhist, all these years I've been a Buddhist, I've never yet, even in India, in the Jurassic Park, you know, felt that I've been in a situation where I didn't have a choice but to kill. I've never felt that yet. So that's not because I'm so holy. I must have set it up in the past by hopefully having done these practices. Are we communicating here? We create our own realities, people. This is why if we have the creator mode or the mummy and daddy did it, we can dump all the blame, you know. Now maybe Puerto Ricans don't blame God, but Italians have very rude words for God. Do you guys have rude words for God? You do. The Italians are shocking, apparently. God is a pig, they say. They all joke. They say the Argentinians tell me they're even worse. So I don't know. Anyway, we love to blame, you know, and that's the dualistic mode of the delusions. But if you've got this view of karma, it's so outrageous because you created your environment. You created your reality. You created the tendencies. You created the cause to have these people happen to you. This is your rapist, honey. I'm sorry. This is your rich person. This is your rat. This is your mosquito, you know. Hello, mosquito. Welcome back. Somehow, it's our own karmic appearance. It's a very powerful concept. It's an amazing view. But really, if we use it properly, it brings incredible accountability. And when we do understand it, and we know we want to change our environment, change our reality, we have to create that with the 4 opponent powers. It's not just some religious thing you should do, you know. It's got such meaning. As Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to do it every day. So it's a long answer to your question. Okay? Yes. Go on.
I want to... On a practical level, if we...
Well, darling, I'm only being practical.
Yeah, well,
don't say it like as if this is not practical.
Well, it's practical, but...
Okay, good.
Like, if we're going to actually go about, like, killing cockroaches in the house, what can we do to minimize our karma?
Huh?
Well, if we actually...
But darling, I just told you.
No. Well,
but, sweetie, I just told you that 4 opponent powers. What have I missed?
If I have to kill them again. Like, how
excuse me, what do you mean? Excuse me, let's have a debate here, okay? What's your name?
Manuel.
Who?
Manuel.
Manuel, listen to me. Where does this phrase, if, what did you say the words again? If I have to, what did you say? What if I have, what did you say?
If I have to kill them.
So what, let's analyze, let's use debate and analyze that sentence phrase by phrase. What if I have to kill them again? Well, according to whom do you have to kill them, Manuel? Where is the law saying you must kill them? Excuse me? Well, then why do you say it? You don't have to do anything. You're the boss, babe. So why are you choosing to kill if you know it'll cause you suffering?
Well, yeah, if I can...
Okay, stop. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay, now do we understand in this world that some people, when they eat peanuts, they get violently ill? You've heard of this?
Yeah.
Right. That means that person would never, in a million years, go anywhere near a peanut. Do you agree with that? Because they know the consequences. Okay, if you got violently ill every time you kill a cockroach, would you ever kill a cockroach again, Manuel? Precisely, baby. That's what the Buddha's view is. So you've got to take time to think about it. So if you have even confidence in the Buddha's teachings, you might not have, in which case, do what you like. It's up to you, you know. But all I'm saying is if you want to look into the Buddha's teachings, this is what Buddha says. This is what he has observed from his own direct observation, that our killing sentient beings will cause us to be harmed in the future. Lower realms, be born a cockroach to get killed again. Who do you think the cockroach is? You know? This is what Buddha's saying. So it really means we've got to think about it. Think about it. The heavy-duty one of karma, but the most empowering one, is it brings accountability. It's not punishment. We therefore don't have to try and get permission. Oh, I have to do it. Is it okay, God? Can I do it, please? No. It's not easy, but we have to think about it. This is the point of it. You get my point, Manuel?
Yeah, I know it, because I get it. Like, I don't know, 6 months ago, I had a mouse in my house, and I got it out without killing it.
Well, good.
So
Well
if I
done.
cannot-
Congratulations.
But there are points when I...
What?
There are points when I see a cockroach and it's near the kitchen.
I know that, Tom. You just have... I mean, if you like Buddha's teachings, you're the sucker who came to the Buddhist Centre. I didn't ask you to. You're hearing these views now. It's up to you. But we've got to be brave, honey. We've got to be brave. And my feeling is we're all very intelligent. And as soon as we decide something, we'll be very creative in finding solutions. So it's really hard one. And forget compassion yet. I'm not even talking compassion yet. The real one is looking into the consequences for ourselves, which is very abstract for us because we don't get the pain straight away, you know? You understand what I'm saying? So we've really got to think about it. Really got to think about it. And do everything we can to prevent. But this is where also the four opponent powers will come in. Because those cockroaches, really and truly, we've got karma with sentient beings. So these are your cockroaches, Manuel. They're not in my house. Do you understand my point? They're yours. So sort of high cockroaches. So then if they're there from past karma of yours, then if you change it by purifying, maybe they'll go away. So have compassion. Blow mantras on them. Keep your house clean. Be practical. Regret any harm you've ever done to these sentient beings in the past, really sincerely. Vow never to do again. And don't be surprised if things change. I've heard people say this many times.
Yeah, it has actually.
Well, good. There you go. Keep trucking, babe. Okay. What else? 10 to 9. Need time to go home. Anyone else? Any questions? No? Yes, sweetheart. Good. Come on. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
So you need to be a vegetarian if you want to be a true Buddhist.
Well, I remember one Lama saying, maybe eating, the point is this, maybe eating meat can lessen our compassion. So it depends on the person. Depends on the person, okay? Because there's two things. One is, the usual simple reason it seems for people not wanting to eat meat is because they don't want to be part of the killing. That's good, but I'm not trying to be cynical here, but I think because there's more things involved there, because the whole global industries are so sophisticated, it's not like as if you're going to get the goat down the road to be killed, and if 3 people don't order it, then the goat stays alive. No. It's such a sophisticated industry that the creatures are going to die anyway, because also, which we never factor in, they've got the karma to be killed. My feeling is even if people become vegetarians, there's going to be a glut of fish in the fish factory, because sentient beings will continue to want to be fishermen, and the creatures who are born the fish will have the karma to be fished. So those are the factors that are also involved. So really, in a way, unless you're in a small town where you can affect the life of sentient beings, the real reason to be vegetarian is for our own sake. Not being rude. It helps develop compassion. Because the fact is, even when you eat vegetables, billions of little creatures died. All the creatures who got squashed and grown and smashed against the windscreen when they took the veggies to the shop. You understand? Yeah. So whatever we do, we can't help but affect other creatures. So we do what we can, and it's for our own sake as much as anything. But it's our decision. So therefore it doesn't follow, depending on the circumstances, that you have to give up meat. It doesn't follow necessarily. It depends on the person. So for example, one of my friends actually was Australian. He's a monk. And his family were the biggest butcher company in Australia. He'd never killed anything, but all his riches and everything came on the back of the death of millions of creatures. So Lama Yeshe said to him, you never touch meat, because he had a strong connection, you understand? But some other person who doesn't kill anything, who really is compassionate, for them to eat meat doesn't necessarily follow it's negative. It doesn't follow every time. But if you ask someone to kill it directly, generally speaking with karma, whether good karma or bad karma, the closer you are to the action, the more powerful the result is, you know. So there's so many variations of situations. It does. So as Lama Zopa says, if you're going to eat meat, at least have compassion for the creature and say a mantra, and then that when you speak a mantra, that blesses your breath, and then you blow on the fish. That can benefit the consciousness that used to live there. So there are things we can do, being aware, being compassionate, wanting to eat to repay the kindness of all the sentient beings. Do you understand? There's many approaches to it. It's not that rigid, not that strict if you interpret it. Do you understand?
Yeah, thank you.
What else? That's it? Time to go home? Yes, darling. Plenty of time. Look, it's only 10 to 9. Yes.
As we've been having this conversation,
Yes.
it has occurred to me, and I wondered if the Buddhist scholars had
Yes.
done much thinking about the debate, the ethical debate on euthanasia.
Yes, of course. Very
Because
clear. Very clear for Buddhists, yes.
It's very common, for example, with our pets.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, but now there's a lot of talk about with people.
That's right, exactly. Exactly. No, it's very clear in the Buddhist position. Very clear, very crystal clear. So let's analyze the situation. Okay. It's the same as we said about the mouse. Remember the mouse in the kitchen? Yeah. And let's say you. What's your name? Linda. Okay, Linda has a mouse in her kitchen. Okay. Robina has a mouse in her kitchen. So I gave the scenario. That first of all, any action we do, which means the word karma, which is an action starting with our thought to do it and then carried out by the body and speech. You understand? So in this case, there's the intention to kill the mouse. You've got it, I've got it. The mouse is there, the object, you do the action, and then the result, the mouse is dead. That's a complete action, roughly speaking. And the Buddha would say those seeds will grow in your mind and then ripen as future rebirths, suffering rebirths. Okay, so what I was pointing out before, the very clear difference in terms of the karma we create, you and I, because I am motivated by the wish to harm this mouse because I hate it, that's why I leave a negative imprint in my mind. And you, because you have a compassion, yeah, to kill the mouse, you think it'll help the mouse, don't you? Because it's suffering. That's what euthanasia is, right? So do you see my point? That's what euthanasia is. It's the thought that if I kill the mouse or my grandma, it'll help them. You understand? Stop their suffering. You agree with that? So that's compassion. But the Buddha would say there's maybe no wisdom there. So let's look at that part. Let's look at that part. The Buddhist view would be that whether it's your grandma or the mouse, the way we die, Buddha says, and the book I'm working on right now of Lama Zopa, as I mentioned it yesterday, is on how to help people at the time of death. And it includes animals. And death is an incredibly important time for the Buddha. The teachings are very detailed about what happens. And the most crucial thing at the time of death is that the mind of the person dying needs to be peaceful, calm, virtuous, because that'll help ripen one of these karmic seeds in your bank vault, you get my point, that will cause you to get a good rebirth. You with me? It's a really vital time. So the Buddha would say that necessarily the mind of that mouse will continue and will take another rebirth, and the karma that determines it ripens when he's dying. And your grandmother's same. So, may I ask you a question? Are you clairvoyant?
No.
Okay, good. So then you can't be certain, can you, that when you kill your grandma, that negative karma ripens and that it causes her to take a very suffering rebirth. You can't guarantee that won't happen, can you? So that's a bit of like Russian roulette, isn't it?
Yes.
Big responsibility, wouldn't you think? Mm-hmm. So therefore the Buddhist view is you do everything in your power to help the person die peacefully, at ease, felt loved by people. And this is often I've found, and I've seen this among other people have talked about, and you see it in your own experience, that when we die, it's the fear more than the physical that makes it bad. So if you can help your animal be peaceful, have mantras, play the Buddhist teachings, have mantras soothing it. And another point here is this. Buddha says everything we see or hear especially leaves a very strong, like a picture in our mind. So if you're hearing, your little mouse or your little grandma are seeing and hearing images of the Buddha and hearing these words, it leaves a karmic connection with the Buddha in their mind, and that will help them get a decent rebirth. Okay. So because it's a huge risk. And you see, our view in the West, of course, is as long as the person looks peaceful, and if they look dead, we feel they're peaceful. But it's a little bit limited, the Buddhist view says. It just doesn't follow. And you can't guarantee, because, I mean, if this poor mouse is already damaged, it's freaking out already, its poor little ego's gone berserk, and now you start stomping it to death, I think it's not going to be very peaceful, somehow. Maybe your grandma, maybe. But it's a bit of a risky thing to do, you know. This is the Buddhist view. It's very clear, and exactly they describe the death process, what ripens at the time of death, what determines what karma ripens. They've got great detail about this. And so the main thing is to help a person, including your animal. And there's many ways you can really benefit them by what they hear and see at the time of death to help their mind transit to the next life and get a good life. Okay. That's the Buddhist view. What do you think? Food for thought, anyway, isn't it? Yes. Yeah, definitely. And very interesting, I read this book recently called The Undead, which is not about zombies, okay? It's this... It's this book by an American, some fellow, he's a scientific journalist. I've got it here, actually, I'll tell you his name. It's a hilariously funny book. Very insightful, very interesting. It's all the research that he's done as a result of all the different conflicts in the states, the different medical systems and the laws and the governments about exactly what death is, all as a result of this, of farming organs, you know? And all the business of keeping people alive to take their hearts out, their livers, and God knows what. I really have second thoughts about leaving my organs to people now. I tell you, it seems dreadful. But he was saying in this book, what's his name? He's written many medical books. Dick Teresi, something like that. It's a very fascinating book, really very funny actually, but very, very fascinating research. Because one of the biggest things, a lot of these people who've got near-death experiences are being interviewed, you know. And now because of this, because also people who think they're dead, and then they've, you know, one guy that cut everything, they're waiting for the permission from the parents to farm this young man's organs, and they cut his liver out, everything was ready, and then the parents refused to give permission. So they've got to sew the liver back and everything, and he comes back to life, you know. The number of stories of people who look like they're dead wake up again, and also all these people who are like on the operating table, completely drugged out of their brains. They ought to be like they're dead as far as the medical system is concerned, but they have all these experiences of leaving their bodies and describe exactly what they're seeing. And this fits perfectly with the Buddhist view of subtle consciousness. They describe it in great detail in Tantra, that when we stop breathing, you're not dead. It's subtle consciousness, and it's there, it could be there for 3 days. There's very clear signs of how you can tell when a person's dead. You know, it's very easy to tell. So the point is, though, one of these doctors, he said, I can say now, hearing all these things, hearing all these conflicts, seeing the people who thought they were dead, who aren't dead, look like they're dead, but they come alive, all these things, and these people with these near-death experiences. He said, I can say now with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. He said, I haven't got a clue what it is, but I can say it's not a function of the brain, which is really helpful. But oddly enough, he's an incredible researcher, but he hardly mentions the Buddhist findings, all the Tibetans, which is most fascinating. He must have just missed out on that, because there's amazing stuff with the Dalai Lama and all these people doing exactly this research, you know. So exactly what happens at death and when and how long it takes, it's a major point for the Buddhists, especially the Tibetans. They really know this stuff well, you know. 9 o'clock. Oh, do my advertisement. Okay, give us one on. I've got an advertisement. Excuse me. Just that somebody. When I was running the prison project, for many years, I ran pilgrimages every year to India and Nepal, you know. Amazing experiences going to these places of the Buddha, where Buddha went. And I mean, the number of people who'd say they had special experiences, special dreams. It was such a special experience. So anyway, I'm doing one again this year and again next year, and it raises money for a thing I've got called the Bodhicitta Trust, which raises money to help lamas open centres and everything. So I'm leading one in October, November. There's these postcards, that's all. That's my advertisement, okay? So you can take a postcard and put them out there. All right? That was my ad. Did I say it too fast? Okay. That's it? Enough? Food for thought? Okay. I did try to talk slower tonight. Did it work? He noticed. Hey? He noticed. Okay. Thanks, everybody, very, very much. So we dedicate, but give meaning to these holy words we're going to say. You know, think that for 2 hours we've been here, and look how quick it goes. So quick, 2 hours, gone like a flash. Every as many moments as we can count, this is how Buddha would say, is as many seeds every one of us has planted in our mind. So here we are for 2 hours being so virtuous, listening hard to the meaning of life and reality and this and that, and incredible. We've sowed amazing seeds in our mind. Be so delighted with yourself and realize you're not the same person who walked in the room 2 hours ago. You've done 2 hours of gardening. You've sown 1 million new marvelous seeds, so be very happy. Then think, may we nourish these seeds which we have planted, which we put there out of compassion, may we nourish them with our practice from this moment forward so that they do grow in the future as the development of our amazing Buddhahood for the sake of every single sentient being, which is why we did it. This is really what dedication means. So be very delighted, very happy. A fruitful 2 hours, okay? And then we also have the prayer of bodhicitta. May bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. And then whatever else you say.
Primero hacemos la oración de larga vida por el maestro Yansi Rinpoche y todos los lamas que enseñan el Dharma. Madre Tare, liberando del samsara. Tú Tare, liberando de los 8 temores. Tara, Madre que libera. Por favor, otorga el don de la longevidad. Por las bendiciones de los gurús raíz y del linaje. Por los logros espirituales de los Jidan, dioses y diosas, por los métodos hábiles de las dakinis y los protectores del Dharma, que podamos realizar gozosamente la esencia de nuestras esperanzas. Ganden Tenzin, eres afable, benevolente y bondadoso. Por favor, permanece con nosotros durante una larga vida. Expande tus actividades iluminadas en todas las direcciones y continúa madurando y sustentándonos a mí y a todos los seres sintientes. Desde este momento y durante todas nuestras vidas, tennos bajo tu tutela. Sé nuestro amigo, nuestro divino y virtuoso guía. Limpia la degeneración de la ignorancia. Ayúdanos a realizar nuestro recorrido por los senderos y caminos y a alcanzar los 3 cuerpos de un Buda. Por la verdad de la realidad incambiable, y por la bendición conjunta de la indestructible Sangha, que la esencia de estas oraciones se logre rápidamente.
That's it? Finished?
No.
One more. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Dedication.
Okay.
Que por los méritos de esta virtud pueda alcanzar rápidamente el estado de un Guru Buda y pueda llevar a este estado a todo ser sin excepción. La mente de iluminación es suprema y muy preciada, que donde no ha surgido surja, que donde ha surgido no disminuya, que cobre cada vez más fuerza. La visión correcta del vacío es suprema y muy preciada, que donde no ha surgido surja, que donde ha surgido no disminuya, que cobre cada vez más fuerza. Así como el valiente Manjushri Samantabhadra distinguieron los fenómenos tal cual son, yo también dedico estos méritos en la mejor forma, siguiendo su ejemplo perfecto. Dedico todas estas raíces de virtud con la dedicación que es considerada la mejor por los victoriosos asidos de los 3 tiempos para poder realizar todas las buenas obras. Finish. Mañana a las 7, aquí, de nuevo.